Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Agile Uprising podcast. I'm Andy Cleff, and my co-host today is Jenny Tarwater, Enterprise Agile Coach at Agile Velocity. Welcome, Jenny.
Thank you.
Share with us some of your secret superpowers.
Secret superpower. My husband actually gave me this nickname, Golden Retriever. So if you say something like, I need, I want, I take that on and I'll go do it. And just like, I just get so excited, just like a little golden retriever, a little tail wagging saying, here you go. Did I do it? Did I do it? So sometimes that comes in really handy when you say something like, hey, we need an Agile coach to come over here, or I need this like new practice, or, sometimes it's less professional things than that.
Joining us today is the wonderful Esther Derby. Welcome back. You were with us December 2019, I think, when your book, 7 Rules for Positive Change, was out. And I think Chris Merman and Colleen talked to you.
Yep.
What are your secret superpowers?
My secret superpowers. Well, if I tell you, they won't be a secret.
Oh, good point.
I don't know. What do you think my superpower is, Jenny?
The first thing that came to mind for me is helping folks see. I know that's a way that you've helped me a lot in the past. Is I'm all wrapped up in some dramatic thing, and you help me step back and kind of see the bigger picture and what might be helpful.
Oh, I love that superpower.
Yay.
It's kind of like the reframing superpower.
There you go.
You've got another one from my perspective. It's the Blender superpower. The Blender. Human systems, all your experience that you've been through in design, development, and change. Some people focus on just that part of the recipe, but you blend it with the human element. It's so wonderful.
I like that one too. I thought you were going to go with the fish. What did they call it on that show? Fishmatic or something?
The Bassmatic.
A Bassmatic. Oh, I do not want Bassmatic to be my superpower.
All right. So let's weave all this back together into our topic today. It's that time of year again.
It is.
Time of year. I'm not talking about pumpkin spice. I'm not talking about Christmas decorations or Thanksgiving menus. It's time for the annual performance review. Such a ritual.
Oh, my palms just started sweating.
Right? Your heartbeat. Here's the ritual.
Yeah.
You gather anonymous feedback without context. You summarize it with a manager who really doesn't know what you're up to. Then there's a review committee. They probably meet in person. And then you sit down across the table with your manager. The manager says, hey, Esther, you go first. How do you think you're doing?
I think I'm doing great.
Well, we have you down as meets expectations, and so what do you do next as you get a ranking, and it's just ridiculous. You've all been on the receiving side and the giving side. Jenny, you said my palms are sweating.
Yeah, I gotta sit there while somebody's judging me.
It is a practice that the research says does not result in actual improvement. It takes up enormous amounts of time, but what it does very well is it reinforces the hierarchy. That I am in a position to judge you, to judge your worth as an employee, and to exert power over you.
It's bizarre. I found in doing some research, I found a Gallup survey or report. I think it was updated for 2020 with the new situations and the numbers. And you reference it, Esther. That's just ridiculous. $2.5 to $35 million worth of time per 10,000 employees at an enterprise per year to doing the annual performance review, right?
Could you state that figure again?
$2.5 to $35 million in lost working hours per 10,000 employees to do the annual review process the old way.
Wow.
Less than 15% of employees surveyed thought it actually helped them improve. And somewhere between 2 and 10, only 2 in 10 strongly agreed that their performance is managed in any way that motivates them to do outstanding work.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big mess, and it's a huge time suck, and it damages relationships between employees and managers. And it can damage relationships between employees when there's that whole anonymous feedback thing, because you can't go find out, and make amends if amends are needed, or find out the context. You're just left kind of wondering, well, who said that about me? And if they said that about me, why did they wait until review to tell my manager? Why didn't they tell me?
So it actually undermines collaboration.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
creates this, well, who said that about me? You mentioned, Esther, power dynamics. Or for both of you, what are other anchors that are holding this in place? It's still prevalent. It's not a dinosaur.
Yeah.
Not going away quickly.
Well, I hear two things. I hear people say, well, we have to do something. And so this is what has always been done. So they do it. And then I hear some people say, that's when I ask HR people, they say, well, this will force managers to give feedback once a year. Like, well, that's really pretty worthless.
I agree with that. I see that at least you get it once a year, because managers may not know how to provide feedback, may not do it frequently, if at all. So at least it's like the MVP of feedback. Like, we're going to spend 30 minutes once a year, at least. Check that box.
Yeah, I mean, when you say it that way, it is as ridiculous as it seems,
Yeah.
right? And that, the answer is to help managers know how to give useful feedback, and help managers understand the impact of the system on performance. So I think there's way too much emphasis on individual performance. For one thing, a lot of work happens in a collaborative way, and it's really hard to tease out, the exact contribution of one individual. And it is entirely possible to take competent people and make them look like idiots, depending on the system.
If I try and, because I'm always like, this couldn't have started off with ill intent. Like, what were people trying to do? Right. And I like cadenced events, right? It gives you that opportunity to sit back and reflect. And I like feedback. So, what about this? And what it came up for me was every instance I can think of where a manager provided me with a valuable annual performance conversation, they would have done it anyway. Like, every example I can think of, like, oh no, I've had performance reviews that were really useful to me. I'm like, yeah, but they also kind of had that conversation with me the month before. Right? Like,
Yeah.
That was not why we had that conversation. It just happened to be in that particular, calendar invite.
Well, I think a lot of people feel they have to have them for legal reasons, so they can justify firing people or promoting people, or they have a way to do their annual cull, which is just a way to avoid having difficult conversations throughout the year. So, I think there's a lot of reasons people get stuck in it. And I tend to think that there isn't ill intent, and the impact is still what the impact is. So I'm not convinced there's a way to fix the annual review.
Fix it if we could reinvent it. And some companies at scale have moved in that direction.
Yeah.
Adobe, Netscape. I don't know the details, but if the three of us could reinvent and make it a more agile approach to performance feedback, what would it look like?
Well, let's talk about what performance feedback even means. What does that mean?
I think I know what the word feedback means. I'm trying to connect it with the word performance feedback, and get all stuck there.
So maybe separate it. Feedback. For me, performance feedback is how am I doing? Which could be simply feedback.
Yeah.
And sometimes it varies. And Jenny, you and I have had conversations about, we pair a lot together, that what kind of feedback do you want? We're both reading, thanks for the feedback. Again, Sheila Heen and Douglas Stone. I'm looking it's like, what kind of feedback do you need right now? I just need appreciation. Can you just give me a little bit of appreciation?
Sure.
Oh, right.
Or can I offer you some coaching? Yeah, I can receive it. Or evaluation. So that's what I'm thinking about when I say, okay, let's reinvent this. Because we know if the annual performance was a prescription drug, the FDA would not approve it for efficacy right now.
Exactly. It would not be approved for.
Right. So if we were to reinvent it, and we, Jenny and I, have a sort of another incentive here. We're part of a very flat team. We no longer have managers. We have peers. We have partners. And we're exploring ways to continuously improve ourselves, our collaboration. And clearly the annual performance review is not a path we want to go down. So what are if a large enterprise came to you, Esther, and said, look, we know this isn't working. We're wasting money. We want to reinvent it. Could we come up with a definition of ready for the org to embark on an experiment of trying something new? What would it look like? Where would you put the parameters?
Well, I don't think there is one right answer. I think there are probably a bunch of different good answers. The first thing I might do would be shift the focus from evaluation to helping people be successful in this organization, and helping people know how to deliver value to their customers and to collaborate successfully with their teams. So I would switch it from, I'm evaluating you to, let's see what we can do to help you be successful here. And some similar things might come up. Some things might come up around, your skills in this area could use some work, or your style is getting in your way. And here's some coaching on how to do things in a different way. So the same things can come up, but not in a sense of, here's what's wrong with you, but here, let's work on this because you'll be even more successful. So I think it would drive a different kind of conversation, but it also has to happen. Like Jenny said, it can't just be 30 minutes once a year. It has to be often.
Right. Well, and there's a principle that I use in Agile coaching, right? If you're not very good at something, do it more frequently, because it'll force you to get better at it, right? Whether that's releasing or planning or whatever the case may be. So if feedback's hard, either to give or to take, do it more frequently. What about monthly? I have a client here in Kansas City they changed to, and they didn't call it monthly performance evaluation. They called it monthly coaching sessions. And it was a requirement from HR, that they do that, because they eliminated the annual performance review and replaced it with monthly conversations.
And people may need some training on how to have that conversation. Because people are so, they often confuse feedback with criticism or evaluation or critique or something like that. But it's information about something that happened in the past, hopefully the recent past, not like 6 months ago or 30 years ago. And with the hope of influencing future behavior. I mean, that's a definition Jerry Weinberg used, and I think it's a useful one. So that means you have to learn how to describe something in a neutral way, so it's not automatically and from the get-go described in language that's likely to make people feel defensive. So be neutral, and then talk about the impact. And if there's no impact, I wonder why people are even bringing it up. And then, then you can do problem solving or coaching or, whatever else is needed. And sometimes people need appreciation, right? I think that's also a super useful thing to do. People get confused that I think feedback is always something that needs to be improved. And sometimes it's feedback about something that is really great, but people may not understand the impact of it because it's easy for them or natural for them.
Right. Yeah, when we talk about blind spots, and I had a Post-it note on my wall from the last time we had a feedback session where I said blind spots are okay, right? That's why one of the reasons that I really like getting feedback is because I'm not objective, right, about myself. And that includes not just things I could improve, but sometimes, like you said, things that come easy to me.
Mhm.
I don't even realize that there's value in that. And Esther, after you asked me what your superpower was, and I said to help see, all of a sudden, I remembered all of these different tools and techniques that you had provided me about, sketching when you're watching a team and like all of these ways to see. And I don't know, you're just like, oh, I like that. I hadn't thought about it that way, right? That blind spot, that how others see you, it's valuable.
Yeah, we can never see ourselves the way other people see us. Feedback can give us some clues, but that's one of the paradoxes of being human.
Yeah, there's no mirror. You
Yeah.
can't see what other people are seeing in your face and the micro expressions.
Yeah. Or our strengths and superpowers, or this, the stuff that, like Jenny said, comes really easily. So we don't notice it as something that has a major impact on other people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would flip the orientation, and I would how can we help you be successful or more successful? And I would make it more frequent, and I would not just focus it on, what needs to improve. I would do those things.
Yeah.
One of the things that you pointed out was there's probably some training and guidance that managers would find helpful about how to provide feedback. I think there's probably the same for folks on how to receive it.
Yep. I think that's also helpful for people.
What comes to mind?
Well, consider the source. There's always going to be some kind of filter, right? I'm going to take feedback differently from different people, depending on the level of respect or, the amount of vulnerability, history, et cetera, as well as situation. Where am I right at that moment, right? Yeah. I get up and I do something. I know it was horrible, right? I really don't need an evaluation right then. Maybe I do need appreciation, but people might not have that toolkit ready. I try my hardest. Any kind of feedback that I receive, even if I want to immediately discount it for whatever reason, to say there might be something there to listen to. Sometimes maybe I need to keep it in a little box and look at it the next day. But there's probably something there to try on or look at and see. And some of the feedback that I've gotten that has been most valuable have come from unexpected places where I would not have looked for feedback.
For example?
I use this word kind of jokingly, but I had a nemesis one time. It just really made my days hard. But boy, there was a couple of things that person pointed out that were true, right? The delivery was not good and such, but it was some things that were said, and appreciation. Boy, when I got appreciation from that nemesis, I knew that was real.
So I think that's a really important point, that, the relationship you have with that person matters a lot. Timing matters, which is why I think it's always important to, have a little social contract about feedback. So you need permission. And you need to know the timing's right. Because if someone isn't, if you've just done a presentation that you sense did not really go very well, and you're kind of like feeling a little battered, that may not be the right time. So yeah, like you said, put it in a little box till tomorrow, and recognize that it's one person's perceptions. It's not the truth about you, and the whole status hierarchy thing tends to reinforce that idea that it's the truth about you. Well, it's not. It's, people put numbers on it to make it feel objective, but it's not. It's a perception. And if you hear the same thing from 5 people, then pay attention.
Well, in the ritual, not only are you getting pseudo feedback, but it's tied to bonus, performance, compensation, which adds to the gravity of that ceremony.
I worked at a company. The 15 years that I was there were 11 layoffs. your stack ranking, your evaluation impacted, your Maslow's hierarchy, right? Oh
Mhm.
gosh, I slipped out of the top tier, right? We've let enough people go now. What does that mean for my well-being and
Mhm.
my family? My palms just started sweating. The PT the impact of that, it was real.
Mhm.
So if we were to separate the two, right? Feedback from compensation, that old model ties them together. And that was one of the
Yeah.
HR/legal reasons that it's lasted so long. What does that look like?
I think separating the two is important, but before we go to that, I want to go back to, because what Jenny said made me think about this, and this is also not incorporated in feedback, which is Lewin's equation, which is performance is a function of the person and their environment, and the environment is almost never considered. So I've seen teams where every single individual on that team was competent and bright, but the process they were using was so screwed up that they all looked like idiots, right? Were they incompetent? No, but their environment made it so difficult for them. The process they were using made it so difficult for them to produce any, workable code that they all looked incompetent. But that almost is never considered. So I would add that in there too. We have to help people be aware that performance is a function of the person and the environment
and the team. So there's a team obligation. And this might lead Jenny into the topic that we wanted to cover. We mentioned earlier, we're exploring flat organization and how to have a sort of roundtable reviews, which take the compensation out where it's not on the table. It's who do you work with? I love the nemesis. Who's your nemesis? Bring them to the table. And we've done this one quarter, and we're going to start again next quarter. But Jenny, your experience, you dropped into it recently. Tell us about it.
So just overall, first, I really liked it and I enjoyed it. I think the format itself, there's consent involved, right? Everybody that I invited, and even if that was somebody I thought might have not as positive perspective, right? They were there because I asked them to be. So that consent was there. I appreciated that. You're right. It was just for that conversation and just for that information. It was not tied to anything else. Right. And I also liked the forcing function that the night before I was doing a lot of self-reflection, right? Because we started off with the individual talking about what they thought their forehands and backhands and where they might need help. Right. And so that really, all right, I got a crowd here. What are they going to see that I don't see? Part of my ego was like, I want to make sure that I get everything down before somebody else can point it out. And then I had this deep moment, and like a relaxing moment, and a deep breath came out, and I'm like, but gosh, if that's all that happened, that would be a disappointment. And then I got excited to wonder what my blind spots were. And to help remember that, I actually went in my holiday decorations and I pulled out like a Christmas present, like a decoration, and I put it on my desk to remember that if something came up, that was a gift and that I should be thankful for it, even if I didn't like it right then, that it was a gift.
Well, it's certainly something to consider and see if it fits. Right.
Right on.
But
don't like it, take it back.
But I think that when that sort of feedback is separated, it's just severed from the compensation, that conversation is completely separate. It makes it much more likely that people are going to seek out some information that isn't confirming their wonderfulness. Because when your job's on the line, your promotion's on the line, whether you're in the right tier is on the line, then the impulse is to just try to get as much laudatory feedback as you can, rather than seek out information that might tell you about one of your blind spots where, man, you could really, you could make some significant change if you were aware of something. So I think that's another reason to separate those conversations from the compensation. And, the whole merit pay thing is
Yeah.
kind of a myth anyway. So
The other thing that happened on that day, so I have two thoughts here. One is the fact that it wasn't tied to compensation or something else to ruminate about later.
Mhm.
Like it was just about the conversation and stuff. In my self-reflection the night before, I had kind of a hard truth I had to face.
Mhm.
And that was that I had not been showing up with my full self. And as Andy said, dropped in, I was, in a newer job, and there was a lot of stuff going on in my personal life. And I thought I was compartmentalizing very well, wherein I wasn't. So I was able to bring that into the conversation, which we have a whole podcast about that. But where it's relevant here is that day was a line of like demarcation for me. Like I left that baggage that day, took a deep breath and said, okay, now that I recognize this, I need to be Jenny, right? There's a reason that Jenny's here and Jenny has her strengths and such. And so let's let those come out. But it was a sense of relief. And I don't know if that would have been tied to compensation or something, that I would have had that same sense of relief. It would have been like, oh, shucks. And this is the reason, like, oh, I didn't get the raise, or I didn't deserve the raise, or whatever the case might have been. I just got to think about, the reflection and the conversation, the new information.
There's another piece that we did intentionally as we designed that experiment. So not only do you as the recipient go first, and there's a sort of a format to it, what are your strengths and what are your areas for improvement, but there's an ask and an offer from the team that you're part of. And so as you go first, what do you need from this team? Not, Jenny, what are you going to do to deal with your blind spots? What do you need from your team to change your impact? And then as each team member goes around and provides the same thing, what are your most significant strengths? What do I see as your areas for development? And what do I see as the team's responsibility in your growth? Right? And so it's this collaborative thing that has never been a part of the annual performance review. But I'm wondering, Esther, based on your comment about the system, maybe there's another lens that we add. What do we need to do about our system as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because in most software jobs, your success is tied to other people. And so looking at that as a group and looking at, how can this group make the best of what they have and minimize their areas where they're not as strong is, I think, a much more useful conversation than just focusing on your individual perceived deficits. And people's performance is not, we're not machines. The way we show up and the way we are able to interact with people and the way we are able to make use of our skills and capabilities and qualities is not, at one even line, right? I mean, we all have good days and bad days. And if you've got stuff going on in the background, maybe you have a stretch of bad days, but that doesn't mean, at least to me, that it's something that should be considered, a black mark, right? I mean, that happens to everybody. And if they get some support, they'll come out of it, and then they'll be back, and they'll be better, and they'll be more committed to the situation they're in, right? But this whole little, you're an automaton and your performance should be exactly the same, no matter what's going on in your life. So that's another thing that I think has to be considered. When I was a dev manager, there's a guy who reported to me who was, he was steady Eddie kind of guy, and suddenly he wasn't so steady. And it turned out that he was going through a really messy divorce and was worried about losing his kids. And, to expect someone to put that in the background is not human. So, we figured out some stuff, and, so he could get to the various court things he needed to get to and get some support. And, eventually he was back. It had gone on for years, it would be a different thing, but, it's just a temporary thing.
There's so many legacies in our world left over from old ways of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about automatons and, always be efficient. We aren't assembly lines. This is not Henry Ford anymore. So there's got to be better ways.
Well, even Henry Ford, the people were still, they were not automatons.
What else? What else about feedback, growth can we add to the conversation?
There is some research about the ratio of positive to negative messages we get in our lives. And for most people, the negatives far outweigh the positives. And I have also seen some discussion that just focusing on the positive is in some ways more likely to result in greater joy and greater skill and greater all this good stuff than focusing on people's deficits. So I wonder if that's another shift. That we focus on, what people are doing well. And, obviously there's situations where you have to bring up some other stuff that's outside of people's awareness, or that it was, they grew up in a family where yelling at people was just normal, but it's not normal at work and not acceptable at work. Obviously there's some exceptions, but again, that's about helping people understand impact and making choices. So I wonder if how that would change things, if the focus were on building on strengths versus calling out deficits, with some exceptions, of course.
Didn't you say something earlier about your superpower being reframing? Let's see. Seems to have some kind of connection there.
Yeah, maybe.
Right.
Jenny, any other thoughts before we wrap?
I think I have a challenge for folks. I'm gonna go a little meta here. We were talking about folks don't have a lot of experience or training in giving feedback and in receiving it. What if you asked for feedback on how you gave feedback?
It seems like a good idea.
Right? Yeah. I don't have anybody that I have reporting to me right now, but let's say I did have 5 people reporting to me. Those are 5 new pieces of data that I could have. What is it, every month? Is that what we decided? Every week? Whatever it is, hopefully daily, right? So get feedback on your feedback.
Yeah.
Invite it.
Well, we're always both giving and receiving feedback, in how we are perceiving things, and it may be that, an expression, it may be the way we raise our eyebrow or something. All of these things in some ways are feedback. So we're always, putting out some level of information. So I think it's being more aware and more intentional about when we have these conversations. I think it's a great idea. And getting feedback on the way you give feedback is helpful. I sometimes teach people how to backlead for when they get like really vague feedback. You know about backleading, Jenny, I'm sure.
Tell us more.
Well, a lot of men don't know about backleading if they've been backled well. If you're good at backleading, the person being backled never actually knows it's happening. This comes from formal dancing. But in feedback situation, if you get something really vague, like, oh, you're too nice, which was feedback that somebody told me about getting at one point, then you backlead them. You backlead the person who gave the feedback and you say, oh, can you give me some examples of when I've been too nice? So you can get some neutral data. How do you see that affecting my ability to be effective, be successful here? How do you think that my style gets in the way? So you get some impact, and then you can ask for some coaching. Well, can you help me figure out different ways to handle those situations? So backleading for feedback.
That could be the topic of yet another. So we're coming up on the end of our time box here. This has been wonderful, Esther. I want to give you a chance to shout out anything you coming up. You have a monthly podcast, Changed by Attraction.
I do.
the last Wednesday of every month. And
It is.
what's in your backlog, or what's shipping?
Well, for one thing, I could keep talking to you guys for the rest of the day. It's just been a lovely conversation. So the most recent podcast came out yesterday at the time of this recording, and it's called "The Past is in the Present." And it talks about how things that happened in past in organizations are rippling through the present and how it helps us to be aware of those. So that's the most recent one. I am working on a YouTube video about remote retrospectives. So that's going to be coming out sometime soon. And we're actually working on the second edition of Agile Retrospectives. So that will include a lot of stuff we've learned since we wrote the first edition, and including information about remote retrospectives and how to elevate issues above, outside the team when there's stuff going on in the team that they need organizational help, managerial help getting solved. We have some information about that, and various other new things.
Lovely. What are the best ways for people to get in touch with you?
People can always email me at esther@estherderby.com. You can follow me on Twitter. I love Twitter.
Mhm.
That look is so interesting.
Information radiator right here. Yes. So, yeah. I love Twitter as well most of the time.
Most of the time I do, but that's because I stay out of certain sorts of pointless arguments.
Right.
That helps. But so it's another way to get in touch with me. LinkedIn.
Cool. We'll include that in the show notes.
And anyone that's interested in hearing a little bit more about how Esther thinks, I know I have 3 books on my bookshelf, and I can say that because, working from home over the last 18 months, I know I haven't lent them out. I couldn't always say they're on my bookshelf, but so you mentioned the Agile Retrospectives, which I don't remember a time when I hadn't read that. Like, it's just so fundamental to, I think my retrospective practices absolutely should have that with Diana Larson. Most recently, the 7 rules for positive, productive micro shifts, macro results. I've attended your book release party at Agile.
You were the golden retriever behind that book release party at the Agile conference.
Maybe.
Yeah, no, you definitely were. You made it happen. And it was super, and it was fun.
Thank you. Great book. There's some just excellent metaphors in there that, I leverage often. And Behind Closed Doors, Secrets of Great Management with Joanna.
Oldie.
Yeah.
This one's been around for a long time because I was a programmer on Wednesday and a manager on Thursday.
Never.
I had a lot to figure out.
Well, thanks again, Esther.
Yeah, it's been delightful. Thanks for having me on.
You too, Jenny. And to our listening audience, thank you. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend, a colleague, or a manager that's still doing performance reviews. If you'd like to join the discussion and share your stories about the best or worst review you ever got, come on over to our Discord server. It's pretty lively. Lost count, it's over 300 people chatting away. Information on agileuprising.com. And finally, support from listeners just like you help us cover our hosting and podcast costs. So see the show notes for details on how to become a patron. Until next time, this is the Agile Uprising podcast, signing out. Shall we do some oh boys to close out?
Oh boy! Boy, oh boy, oh boy.
Oh boy.
Oh boy!
Oh boy.